This is an Eye on Annapolis bonus podcast.
Well, I have never been in the guts of 222 Severn. It's right there on Severn Avenue, right on Back Creek, Annapolis Harbor. I guess Spot Creek, Annapolis Harbor. Most people know it as like the Chart House complex, maybe, but this is the Annapolis Yacht Yard and has a tremendous history. And when you're talking about history, the only person in town that you want to talk to is probably David Gendell, who is the author of 3 books. The most recent one is called Battles at Annapolis, 2 Remarkable Games in the Army-Navy Rivalry. The one prior to that was fairly recently, was the Last Days of the Schooner America, which really has a lot of history here, and we do want to get into that. And your very first one, which was really a wonderful book, was all about the Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse. It was the Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse, a Chesapeake Bay icon. And apparently David, when he writes books, has colons in all of his titles. So
yeah, that's a fairly modern thing, is to add these details in the title. It helps on online booksellers, and it helps with people searching for specific words. So we end up with these 15-word titles.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, if you're looking for story on lighthouses, Thomas Point may not ring with
you got it,
with Mr. Google. You got it. But David Gendell is the co-founder of a popular magazine that is all across the Bay, or a couple of popular magazines, Spin Sheet, Prop Talk. And way back when, you decided to make the jump into corporate, and then you made the jump out of corporate.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the story's been well told. Spin Sheet's having its 30th anniversary in 2025, so we've had the opportunity to revisit some of those days. But Mary Iliff Ewenson and I started Spin Sheet in 1995, and we were in our 20s at the time. It was a very humble bootstrap startup. I did the first couple issues on the kitchen table of my apartment in Eastport, my unair-conditioned apartment in Eastport, with a fan blowing through the kitchen. And we were able to build the magazines up sometime around 2007. I had 3 young kids, and all I had ever done was sailing and boat related things, and then these magazines. And I was a bit worried that the sand was running out of the hourglass from a career perspective, and I was fascinated by digital and technology and advertising and marketing digital. So I made the leap into the corporate world. I spent 17 years in the corporate world with a couple different financial technology companies focused on advertising and marketing. But along the way, I never lost my connection to this place and these subjects. So I was sailing, all the time, raised our kids on the water, power boating and sailing and swimming. That was always where my heart was. So when we reached the stage a year or so ago where the corporate chapter was coming to an end, I wanted to get back to my roots, back to Eastport and back to Annapolis. And thankfully, I'd been able to do these 3 books on the side while I was doing this corporate thing. There was a lot of book research and writing happening on airplanes, a lot happening on evenings and weekends, a lot happening in hotel rooms in Silicon Valley, et cetera. So yeah, that's the arc of the career there.
Have you found your place now?
Yeah, I have. I love, as I said, it's obvious that I love sailing. That's a huge part of my identity. But I also love, I love advertising. I love marketing. I love messaging. I'm not going to use the storytelling word, which has been almost a cliche at this point. But I love that, and I love bringing digital into it. So, I'm continuing with the writing, but I've also taken a new role here in Eastport. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for Quantum Sails, which is a worldwide sailmaker. 65 locations, second biggest sailmaker in the world. And they have a major presence here in Annapolis. So I'm looking after marketing and advertising for Quantum, partnerships, strategic partnerships, that sort of thing. And I've been doing it about 2 months, and I'm really enjoying it.
Fantastic. Well, I know Quantum's been just a mainstay of, I wouldn't say Eastport. The Eastport's fairly new because they moved their loft down here to on Severn Avenue from out on Bay Ridge. They've been around as long as I've been around here.
Yeah, they were founded in Annapolis in 1996, and 65 locations around the world, 3 big production facilities. They're the second biggest sailmaker in the world. So, quite an impact on the sport of sailing.
Well, let's talk about your books. And one thing that I really, truly love about your books, and I will say that I have not read the The Last Days of the Schooner America yet, but I am going to read that. But I have read the other two. But your books are very easy to read. And I don't mean that to mean that it's like, a BuzzFeed.
Yeah.
But they are very easy to read. They're very easy to get sucked into and deep into it. But they're not shallow. I mean, they're so well researched. And you alluded to that being a lot on your, on the planes and in the hotel rooms and everything else. But I mean, you really dig deep into.
Yeah. So thank you, for that. That's a nice compliment. Easy to read, but in depth and research is about the nicest thing an author could hear. Yeah. I mean, let's break it down. I love the research. I love that, and things like the Schooner America book have 250 footnotes in there. And I spent a lot of off days, at the National Archives in College Park and in Washington, D.C. Same with Battles at Annapolis, same with the Lighthouse book. So I love the details, the details and sort of chipping out the little cool facts that connect this thing is really a dopamine rush to me. And that part of the process is an absolute joy. Probably aside from being on the water under sail, my next happy place is, bundled up because it's always cold, bundled up in an archives, looking at documents with a cart full of files next to me waiting to be discovered. Now, that said, that can sometimes make for dry reading. And, I'm inspired by authors. This probably won't come as a surprise, such as Eric Larson, Nathaniel Philbrick, are authors who are amazing storytellers on top of their research. So those were the models that I strive for. And when you get into subjects like the 3 I've chosen, lighthouses, the Schooner Yacht America / World War II, and Army Navy football, I mean, those are subjects that are very close to people's hearts. Those are subjects that people feel incredibly passionate about. And there's people whose entire identity is built around lighthouses, right? There's people whose entire scholarly work in life has been around the Schooner Yacht America or World War II. So I knew I had to tell a good story, but I also had to get my facts right. I had to be completely watertight because on any of those 3 subjects at any point, my email can ding and it's going to be somebody that spent their entire life on lighthouses and challenged me on something.
David, you're full of.
Yeah, you got this wrong. You didn't. So to me, that authenticity was everything. I had to be watertight. That's the word that I always use. No leaks in the ship. And Schooner Yacht America, deeply researched and deeply beloved in the sailing community. World War II and what happened here in Annapolis, same thing. And then to get to Army Navy football, and that's another area where people are very passionate about. So I needed to have my act together.
Well, I'll tell you, the 3 books you got, I mean, the Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse, I would recommend anybody get that. You can get it at any of the local bookstores or pick it up on Amazon, or actually you can go to davidgendellbooks.com, and that's Gendell books.com. Just a fabulous history of this lighthouse that we've seen pictures of. I mean, Thomas Point is synonymous with Annapolis, as is the shipbuilding that we had here, as is the Army Navy game, although typically not played here.
Yes.
Those are really truly centric to Annapolis. And I think that anybody should get that. I know you had a great opportunity to go out there onto the lighthouse with Jimmy Buffett, and you were the MC and the storyteller at the Lighthouse 150 celebration, which was just a wonderful evening to raise money to raise the lighthouse because we're in danger of having it
Correct.
Be underwater a little bit.
Yeah, these 3 subjects were chosen, very specifically, and like Mom and Apple Pie and Cal Ripken and Old Bay. These are the sort of things that are in the fabric of our community, right? And there's no denying any of these 3 subjects. So when I chose where I was going to go, an inch wide and a mile deep, the Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse, the Schooner Yacht America and Eastport during World War II and the Army Navy football were three very logical places for me to do that because I know they are beloved in the community and they're very close to my own heart.
True. Well, I will say before we move on from that, I do want to make sure that everybody realizes that you can actually go out onto the Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse. There is a tour that's offered. It's the U.S. Lighthouse Society has it. You can get linked to it from the Annapolis Maritime Museum. Do it. This is hands down the best tour that I have ever done anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, look, sense of place underpins all three of these books, right? A specific place on the earth, and the Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse is, one of those places. I don't want to get spiritual about it. I'm not sure if there's confluence lines or something happening out there, but when you step aboard that thing,
is that the proper term when you get onto a lighthouse? You step aboard?
You do, yeah. You're aboard the lighthouse. When you step aboard that thing, you are transported not just to a different time, but almost to a different place. It feels like you're on some parallel plane to the rest of the earth in a good way. And while you're out there, time kind of stops, and it's a very special place. And you mentioned Jimmy Buffett, who certainly looked at the world in that kind of a lens. And, John Potvin and I were standing on the deck when he stepped off the bow of his boat onto the lighthouse, and he felt it immediately. His eyes got wide and he looked around and said, we had a lighthouse just like this near where I grew up in Mobile, and I'm have all the feels now. I've got all the feels. That's a phrase that he used. And, I think anybody that goes out on that tour will feel that too. It's a very special spot.
I agree. Definitely do it. I think they're sold out for this year, but put that on your bucket list for 26 for sure. The last days of the Schooner America, and I was very fascinated to learn that I had no idea that the America's Cup was named after this yacht.
Yes. Yes. And even sailors tend to not know that. And just to set the stage on the Schooner America and how it is possibly connected to Annapolis is, she's the most famous yacht ever built. Built in the spring of 1851 in Lower Manhattan, sponsored by members of the New York Yacht Club, which was new at the time. And she was built expressly for the purpose of Grand Prix yacht racing. And she was taken to England, sailed over there on her own keel, and on August 22nd, 1851, won a race around the Isle of Wight and was presented with the trophy, which was later renamed America's Cup, with an apostrophe S named after the yacht. What happened on that day in 1851 is deeply researched. I mean, there are books on that upon books, and we know what the crew ate for lunch. We know where they were standing at each point in the race. We know when the sails went up and down, etc. My story picks up when that race ends and goes all the way through World War II, where improbably that same yacht, that same schooner, ended up in Eastport, hauled out on a windy evening in December 1940 and stayed here all the way through the end of World War II on the ground, right near where we sit today, near the Chart House restaurant's current site. So it did end up in Annapolis. So, I keep referring to her in the promotion of that book as a child star. Her most famous victory happened just a couple months after she was launched, but she lasted for 91 more years and ended up here in Eastport, which is just fascinating.
That's fantastic. And I saw the little video promo on T2P TV.
Yes.
And you were saying that Fred Hecklinger?
Yes, Hecklinger.
Given you a piece of wood that was from her.
Yeah.
And there it is in front of us.
Yeah, I just pulled it out.
And I love that you said, why do I get this? And he says, well, you ought to look into it.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly.
And a book was born.
I think all of us that have spent time around Annapolis, and especially on the waterfront, or across the bay, because this is elsewhere too, have heard about bits of the Schooner Yacht America. There are trophies made out of it. There's a half hull on the wall that Fred carved at the Boatyard Bar and Grill. The Severn Sailing Association's mantle is made from it. There's material at clubs all over the bay. But how did that material end up here, was the beginning of my investigation. And it was Fred who said, yeah, you need to look into this. And I was lucky enough, John, on two counts there, because I was a young man at that point and I'd never written a book before. And two things happened. First, there were still a few people alive at that time in the late 1990s that had actually been in Eastport as part of this project in the early 1940s and had seen America and had been there on the scene. And I was able to speak with them in person and get them on the record, which was, remarkable. And I didn't write the book for 20 more years, but I had all those interviews. And then the second thing that was important, and I think something that your listeners would really appreciate, is all through the 90s and into the 2000s, Mike Myron, who a lot of folks in Eastport know, owned the Eastport Shell and was a lover of history. Mike went around and put a microphone under the noses of anybody with an interesting story to tell, much like you're doing these days. And he asked the probing questions. And if he saw somebody with gray hair that was interesting, he was going to interview him. And so Mike made hundreds of these oral histories, and they're all at the Annapolis Maritime Museum now under the title, the Mike Myron Collection. And I was able to access those, and many of those touched upon wooden boat building during World War II in Eastport, and then tangentially into the schooner yacht America in Eastport. So that preservation of history that Mike did kind of on an ad hoc basis, which is now formalized over at the Maritime Museum, incredibly valuable, and just says, what you do and what others who capture history here do in the modern day, in 50 years, some researcher could be digging back into this. It's kind of a cool idea.
He was way before his time.
He was.
That is for sure. And I will say it's, again, for those that don't know, there's a wonderful history about this property and how in World War II, we were forced, if you will, to turn out boats.
Yes.
For the war effort. And later, obviously, it became, most of us probably know that it was the Trumpet Yacht Yard. It's at some point where they were the chart house where they were rolling out the luxury yachts.
Yes.
So
it all happened right here. And you talk about a sense of place. You can walk through this place and see signs of that World War II boat building. There's a literal sign in front of the place that you can see on Severn Avenue, but you can walk through here and sort of pick up the vibe. Yeah. In just 4 years, the team here built over 100 wooden warships for the Allied Navy right on this site on Severn Avenue. They built PT boats and they built submarine chasers here on site.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Wild. But you dig into the history of Eastport and it's, or Annapolis in general, it's pretty wild there. Well, let's talk about battles at Annapolis. And we're not talking about naval battles.
Right.
Well, maybe we are talking about naval
There's
battles.
a couple naval battles in there, but it refers to the two games. Yeah.
But Army-Navy is really an iconic game. It's America's game. They branded it as everything else there. The first game was played back in 1890. And, we all know that Philadelphia is like the big home field, if you will, for the Army-Navy game, and it alternates at other places. But there were two that were played, when they first started, I guess they alternated between the
Correct.
campuses, but there were two big ones that were played right here in Annapolis, and that's the focus of your book.
Yeah. The Army-Navy story, much like the schooner yacht America in 1851 story, is a very heavily trafficked patch of water. Lots of books about Army-Navy. John Feinstein, wrote an amazing book about it. I'm not going to bring anything new to the epic sweep of the Army-Navy rivalry. That's been well covered. The star players, the famous games, the presidents, ambassadors, and queens that have been to the games, et cetera. But what I did is I found the last two games, the most recent two games played at Annapolis. So in 1893, there was a game played on Warden Field, which is still there. It's the parade ground and the drill area now. And in 1942, there was a game played at Thompson Stadium, which is where Lejeune Hall is now, the site of the swimming. And it was on the water at that point prior to some landfill. And I began researching first the 1942 game, and found out it was a really extraordinary game, the circumstances around it. And then I tracked down a couple of the players and followed their stories into World War II. And they did some extraordinary things in their service career. And I thought for a while that was a book on its own, the 1942 game. It was almost canceled due to the World War happening. President Roosevelt personally got involved and said, we can't cancel this game. We have to play it for morale, for sense of normalcy. And in fact, I not only want it played, but I want it broadcast all around the world. Well, his staff scrambled to make this happen. There were a lot of people that thought it was inappropriate for an Army-Navy game to be played while their brethren were off at war. So they had to come up with some special restrictions. So it would be held on campus at the academy on the yard. There would be severe ticketing restrictions around the game. The Corps of Cadets could not come down from West Point. The press corps were not invited. Only select members could attend of the press corps. And in fact, it was so unique that because there were no Army fans there, they ordered the plebes and the third class midshipmen to cheer for Army. So they set them up behind the Army bench, taught them some Army cheers, and ordered them to cheer for Army in a show of sportsmanship. And then I got into the details, and they needed a mule, they needed an Army mascot, to face off against Bill the Goat, and they couldn't get the Army mule down here because it was a war going on. So they went out to Parole, and there was a dairy farm out there off Riva Road, and they borrowed a farmer's mule and brought him and dressed him up as the Army mule. So when I found out these little details, that 1942 game really jumped out at me and became something that I wanted to chase down.
I mean, that game sounds a little bit like COVID, where the other team can't bring their fans, and when they played it up at West Point.
That's exactly right. And when it became clear that 2020 game was not going to be able to be played in a big neutral site and was going to have to be played under special restrictions, you're exactly right. And that did harken back to the 1942-43 games, which were both played on campus. And Army happened to be the home team in 2020, which is why that game ended up at West Point at Mikey Field. Yeah.
How does this tie into the 1893 game? Which, both, by the way, Navy won, I believe. Both
Navy did win both of the games. Yeah. So I'm chasing down the 42 game. I'm fairly far down the road, and just, the story's kind of unfolding in front of me about the players and the coaches and the circumstances around it. And, I'm finding it really fascinating as an Annapolitan that this happened right here on the edge of Spa Creek. Well, then simultaneously, I discovered that the most recent game prior to that was 49 years earlier in 1893. So I spent some time researching that 1893 game just to kind of set the context. And what I found was a very extraordinary Army-Navy football game. It was played on the yard at Warden Field. The game of football was very different at that point. It probably more closely resembled rugby in 1893. There was the concept of downs. There was the concept of a line of scrimmage. Some of the position names would be familiar. There was a quarterback, a halfback, a fullback, a center, etc. But it was very rough and tumble. And the flying wedge was in vogue at that point, which was made illegal the following season due to injuries and even deaths because of it. But basically, an offense would line up in a V formation and run full speed at the defense. Okay. Minimal protection, no helmets, minimal protection. So the game on the field was almost violent. It was very gentlemanly played, but it was very rough just by its nature. Well, simultaneously in that 1893 game, the game had already come to such rivalry proportions that 8,000 fans came to this game via train to Annapolis. The Army offices in Washington and the Navy offices in Washington emptied out, and the officers came here to Annapolis to root for their teams. Lots of alcohol and lots of gambling. There was a lot of betting on the outcomes of this game. And so as the afternoon wore on this cold, early December Saturday afternoon at Warden Field, you have an intense game bordering on violent. You have an intense rivalry with stands packed with both sides of it, lubricated by alcohol, and then fueled by this betting. Well, you can guess we've got a close game. It's coming down to a last kick. Things in the grandstands get a little bit wild. And there's some bad language exchanged. There's some shoving. There ends up being a couple of fist fights. We end up with quite a rough scene in the grandstands. So, Army misses a kick and the game ends with Navy winning as darkness begins to fall on the field. But the scene on the sidelines got a little bit out of hand. And the word of that got back to the President Grover Cleveland, and he and his staff decreed that Army and Navy could not play each other anymore. It was too distracting. It was too potential for injuries. It was too emotional. They were permitted to continue to play football, but they weren't allowed to play each other. So the game had a 5-year hiatus where they didn't play each other in the wake of that 1893 game. So as a writer, I've got a 42 game that's played in a very patriotic, austere circumstances. And 49 years earlier, a couple hundred yards away, I've got a wild, close, emotional game that ended up getting the teams banned from playing each other. I have to link those two things together. I have to.
Yeah. I had no idea that was the reason for the
pause,
the pause in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was able to, just like in 42, I was able to grab a couple of players from 1893 that were key players on the field and then follow them into their military careers from both sides. So, the Spanish-American War happened a couple of years later, and the star players from both sides ended up having major roles in that war. So, I followed them off into that war. And some of this is, football as a distraction from oncoming wars. And that happens in both of those.
Well, yeah, no, I can totally see it. And the pomp and circumstance and the pageantry that goes along with this game. And I mean, as you indicated, I mean, it was still there. It was there to a degree back in the 1800s. And
yeah, 1893. Let's go here, John. It was the first appearance of a goat as Navy's mascot, was in that 1893 game. Some sailors came down from the Brooklyn Navy Yard to watch the game, and they brought their ship's mascot with them, which was a goat. And they dressed it in blue and gold and ran it around on the field before the game and at halftime. So that's the beginning of some of this pomp and circumstance. There was, an admiral on the Navy side, huge football fan, sitting on the 50-yard line in the front row watching the game. So there's a VIP attending, in 1893.
Well, I looked at Wikipedia on the game earlier before we got here, and I realized I thought that most presidents attended the game, but actually I found out that most don't. It's only 11 that have attended.
Yeah. Well, this 1893 game, the vibe I get, and I write about this in the book, was in the days leading up to it, it became clear that this was going to be a little bit of a scene, this game. There was a lot of hype around it. The New York newspapers were previewing it breathlessly. Both teams were coached by high-profile coaches, two of the leading men of college football. So it became clear that this game was going to be a bit of a spectacle. And there were Navy and Army officials who, prior to the game, announced they would not be attending because they were concerned about exactly what ended up unfolding.
A little bit prescient there. That's for sure. Are you going to the game this year?
Oh yeah, yep, absolutely.
How many have you been to?
This is going to be my first.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
It's always a lot of fun. It'll be played up in Baltimore. I believe tickets are not available.
They're not. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, John, this is the approach I made to this Battles at Annapolis book. Is I did not go to either academy, nor am I a football guy. I went to.
You're a sailor.
I'm a sailor, and at St. Mary's high school, I played soccer and lacrosse. We had a great football program, but I was not part of it. So, how does a non-football player and non-service academy guy approach this subject? Well, that's the twist, is that these games were played at Annapolis. The stands were filled with locals. And, that whole, the circus comes to town kind of vibe, that whole, this is a very extraordinary thing, and it's on stage right here in the middle of our town. So the stories are kind of written through the eyes of a local. And what this would have seemed like if you were a teenager or a football fan in the region, and these national spectacles are suddenly right in your backyard. So that's the approach that I make, very respectful of the service academy aspect to it, very careful on the football side of it to make sure I got all that right. But at the same time, these are exciting Saturday afternoons for locals when these major spectacles come to our hometown.
For sure. Well, I will say that, you are a logical choice because you are Annapolis. You are in history Annapolis. Okay. And we've got three great authors from Annapolis. You got Tom Gay, you've got Jeff Holland, who's wonderful, and obviously yourself, who just sort of breathe the history.
Well, let's not forget Jane McWilliams, who is a mentor to.
Okay, we get into Ginger Doyle.
All three of ours. Yeah, you get back to Ginger Doyle, others, et cetera. But yeah, of operating today. Yeah, I'm lucky enough to have grown up here, and I've spent my entire life at Annapolis. And in fact, within a few hundred yards of where we're sitting, I graduated from elementary school. I graduated from high school. We started Spin Sheet, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm entrenched as a townie, you might say, and have always had this love for history. I wanted to uncover the history, especially as it relates to things on and along the waterfront. So it just seems like a natural progression.
And again, in the book, The Battles at Annapolis, I know you had some commentary from Wags from the Capitol, who said he's been covering Army Navy for 30 years and said the level of detail. So, that's high praise coming from Bill.
Sure.
But, you had Admiral Lynch did a forward, and you had Bill Belichick was in there as well. And we know that Belichick's got some roots here in Annapolis. I know he was a graduate of Annapolis High.
Correct.
How did that all come about?
Yeah. So, the thing that all three of those gentlemen have in common, Bill Wagner, Admiral Lynch, and Coach Belichick, they all love Annapolis. They all, Annapolis is very close to their heart. And by Annapolis, I mean the town of Annapolis, the city of Annapolis, and the whole scene here. Admiral Lynch did not grow up here. He came from Ohio to become a plebe at the academy and play football, but he's been deeply connected ever since. Admiral Lynch was the captain of the 1963 Navy football team, which played in the national championship game. Roger Staubach was the quarterback, and Admiral Lynch played both offense and defense in that national championship game for Navy. Went on to become an admiral, went on to become superintendent at the Naval Academy, and he currently maintains a house right on Spa Creek, just up the creek from here. And he's, to me, very iconic inside of the Navy football community, and therefore in the Army-Navy football community. So I knew I needed someone like Admiral Lynch to participate in the book. So our friend Dick Franio, who knows everybody, set me up with a lunch with Admiral Lynch. We sat down at the boatyard where many great things began here in Annapolis, and we chatted about his story, coming from public school in Ohio. He had never been to Annapolis before he arrived on induction day.
That's the greatest thing in the world, is to be there on I-Day, and looking at 1,000 people going, what the hell have I done?
Yes, exactly. And he was recruited to play football at some of the Big Ten schools, and he grew up a massive Notre Dame fan as a Catholic kid in Ohio. And so once Admiral Lynch realized that I actually was going to have deep research, deep respect, and do him proud, he happily agreed to write the foreword. And he's been a great supporter. I was just with him a few days ago, signing a huge stack of books that he had bought for his friends and family. So that was huge to me. And then Coach Belichick, as you said, did grow up here, went to Annapolis High School, played football and lacrosse for the Panthers when the high school was located where Maryland Hall is now. And Coach Belichick's father was on the Navy football staff for many years, and he is a massive supporter of Army and Navy football, Service Academy football. And I knew I needed to get in touch with him to run this by him and hopefully get an endorsement. We have some mutual friends. He stayed close to some of his friends here from growing up. The guys he played sports with, he stayed very close with. So I was able to get in touch with him and send him the first third of the book, again, just to show him that I was legitimate and that I was going to be respectful, because he didn't know who I was. And some soccer player from St. Mary's, writing about Army Navy football.
That's 2 strikes against you.
Exactly,
right away.
Exactly. So he was nice enough to send along some great words of encouragement and PR blurb, which is on the front cover. So lucky enough to use these folks who love Annapolis and get them involved.
Well, they join that list of all of us, as well as you, as far as people that love the town that we grow up in there. But okay, so you've got these 2 games.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a melee.
Yeah. A scene.
And we've got a president and all the hotshots in DC going, I just want to stay out of that.
Yes.
So what was the dynamic? Were there any good player stories? Admiral Lynch.
So let's hit the 1893 game for a moment and think about the young men who played in that game. Now, they were all white. The academies were not integrated at that point, but they did come from a surprisingly diverse set of backgrounds, and the starting lineups from each team are still available. And I researched every single player, and there's everyone, from the sons of governors and the sons of admirals playing in that game, all the way through what we now call first generation college students, sons of illiterate factory workers, sons of recent immigrants. So you had this great meritocracy where if you got there, all that stuff fell away where you came from. And, like we see today on induction day, everybody's even on that first day. And so it was really neat to dive into the stories of some of these players. But the one that really jumped out to me in 1893 on the Navy side was a young man named Worth Bagley. And he was from Raleigh, North Carolina. His grandfather had been governor of North Carolina, so he was that guy. His father had been a Confederate officer. And there were several players on these teams, mostly on the Navy side, whose fathers had been in the Civil War on the Confederate side. So there was still some sense, even 25 years later, 30 years later, that there was a wound that hadn't healed yet, which was your family had served in the Confederacy, and now you were the next generation to bridge that back. So Worth Bagley entered the academy at age 15 and struggled academically and actually had to stop and restart the program because he had gotten so far behind academically. But he was an extraordinary athlete, great baseball player, great football player, also sang in the academy's choir. He was that well-rounded guy, and he was sort of a golden boy of the academy. They loved him. He was one of the more popular men. But on the football field, he was very dynamic with the ball. He was a fast runner. He was a shifty runner, and he was a great player. We were lucky enough that there was a biography written about Worth Bagley at the time in the 1890s where we're able to pull out a lot of his letters and really get into his personal feelings at the academy and how important the game was to him. But at the same time, his homesickness, his struggles with academics, the same stuff every college student might go through, especially at one of the service academies. So we get a real glimpse into Worth Bagley's personality. He goes on to a very high-profile on-ship position in the Spanish-American War. They end up on the north coast of Cuba in the early days of that war, and he gets killed on the deck of a patrol torpedo boat on the north coast of Cuba. He becomes the first American killed in action in that war. And so this becomes national news that the son of a Confederate officer is the first blood shed in that war. And it's on the front page of the New York Times. Thousands attended his funeral in Raleigh. There's a statue of him on the State House grounds in Raleigh. Worth Bagley closed this gap between the Confederacy and the United States. He was symbolic of that. His blood, Confederate blood shed on the deck of an American boat, it's over now, was the theory at that point. So Worth Bagley, star of the game, carried off Warden Field on the shoulders of his teammates at the end of the game, all the way through this high profile killed in action situation. So he is really at the heart of the 1893 section.
That's wild. So, and he really did at that point then. He was a catalyst for uniting the United States.
And in the South especially, they teach this at North Carolina State University. There's a history professor that teaches this, who I've been able to watch one of his lectures. Very symbolic. They were keen to reunite the United States at that point, and Worth Bagley became a symbol. Our finest young man we sent north to represent the United States, and he ended up having the ultimate sacrifice. So very high profile. If you like that part of the story, I'll give you 3 spots you can see Worth Bagley today. His name is in, 4. Statue of him at the State House in Raleigh. His name is in Memorial Hall at Bancroft Hall, obviously. In Bay Ridge, there's a path called Bagley Path, which goes down to the water near River Drive, which is named for him. And in First Presbyterian Church on Duke of Gloucester Street, there's a stained glass window. He went to services there every Sunday, and there's a stained glass window there in his memory as well. So those are 3 spots you can see Worth Bagley in Annapolis.
Very neat.
Yeah.
Very neat. Any interesting stories out of the
42 game? So the 42 game was played by young men, still all white at that point. We didn't see integrated sports for a couple more years at the academy. It was just starting in college football in general. We talk about that a little bit in the book. But the young men in 1942 game all knew they were going to war. Pearl Harbor had already happened, and they had watched their teammates from the prior year off in combat, by the dozens. So they knew exactly what was going to happen to them, and they were ready for that. But they had some football to play before they went and did that. I track a few of the players in that 42 game, how they came to the academy, what their experiences were like in that game, and then off into the war. The 2 that I followed the closest in 1942, one from each side, were linemen in the trenches. On the Army side, a player named Robin Olds, O-L-D-S. And Robin Olds was an All-American lineman, played on both sides of the ball, was a very high-profile military academy cadet. His father had been a famous Army flyer. He was on track to become an Army aviator, and he was a big, strapping, tough guy. On the Navy side, I track a player named Jake Laboon, L-A-B-O-O-N. And Jake Laboon was a bit of a role player. He was very affable. He was very friendly. He was very gregarious. He was filling in for an injured player on the line. Well, Olds and Laboon end up in a fight in the 1942 game. They end up taking swings at each other. And Jake Laboon punches Robin Olds in the face when the official's not looking, and his 2 front teeth get knocked out on the field in Annapolis. So Robin Olds, being a tough guy, goes off the field, stuffs some cotton up in there. Legend is the doctor said, "You're done for the day." He ran back up to his coach, Red Blake, and said, I'm ready to go back in. I'm cleared.
Doc says I'm fine.
Doc says I'm fine. We know how this goes. So Robin Olds, with cotton and gauze stuck up in the holes where his two front teeth have been, run back in there, finds Jake LeBoon and comes crashing down on him and breaks Jake LeBoon's arm. So we've got a little scrap going on in the middle of this game. I follow Olds off into his service career afterwards. He becomes a triple ace fighter pilot. He's an ace in World War II. He's an ace in the Korean War, and he's an ace in the Vietnam War. So just an extraordinary man with an extraordinary maverick kind of a career. Jake LeBoon goes off into the submarine service for the Academy, dives off the deck of a moving submarine to rescue a downed aviator, gets him back aboard the sub, gets a Silver Star for that, and becomes a Jesuit priest and ends up being chaplain of the Atlantic Fleet. And the religious center over at the Academy is today named the LeBoon Center at the Naval Academy, named for Jake LeBoon. And, so following these players on their journeys to West Point and Annapolis, they're scrapped during the game and then off into service, was tremendously rewarding. And that really comes full circle when I'm speaking with Admiral Lynch about this, and he says, I not only knew Jake LeBoon, and he was a friend, he baptized my son. It just shows you how tight that brotherhood is.
It really is, and it's refreshing to see what Navy football. I mean, it's very easy to think like the football jocks at any college. It's like, they're a separate entity, and they are to a degree.
Yes.
In many, and they are here in Annapolis as well. But these guys, after 4 years, got a whole different trajectory.
Yeah, and remember then it was 3 years because the Academy's program was accelerated due to the war. So they were cramming. And so let's just look at Robin Olds, for example, at West Point, just to share the wealth. So Robin Olds came in there knowing he wanted to play football and knowing he wanted to become a pilot, a combat pilot. So he had the West Point academic program condensed into 3 years. He had a flight training program on the fast track. And he had what we would now call Division I football, where he was an All-American player. So his days were sunrise to well after sunset, packed, tightly scheduled with all of these activities. And you couldn't ask him to give up any of them. He wasn't going to give up any of them. And he ended up being great at all three things. LeBoon didn't have the flying side of things, but also a crammed academic schedule, 4 years packed into 3, all the military training, all the naval training, and high-end football. So really just remarkable. Echoes what they have today. Those guys at both the academies still have to do all the academics. They still have to take electrical engineering. They still have to learn how to handle weapons and how to handle tanks and ships and play Division I football. Yeah.
It's not easy.
It's remarkable.
Not easy. Well, I'll tell you, David, I mean, you are all over the place here. I know that you do lectures out on the schooner Woodwind.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you have done and probably will be doing in the future the winter lecture series at the Annapolis Maritime Museum, which everybody should be a member and join and partake in those, because that's what else are you going to do in February and January, February, and March? I mean, it's just a great time to learn a little bit about our bay and everything else. So where else can we find you?
Yeah, so I recently joined the board of directors at the Annapolis Maritime Museum and got my hands into that winter lecture series because I love that series. And it turns out that is, of all the amazing things that happen at that museum, that is one of the most successful and most popular and most highly rated programs that they run, is that winter lecture series on Thursday nights in January, February at the museum. We've got a really good schedule coming together for 2026. It'll be announced in the next few weeks. I think you're going to be, your listeners are going to be thrilled when they find out some of these. A couple of the names we've mentioned here already are going to be there, including me. But near term, I'm going to be on the Woodwind on October 5th for a 3-hour trip out to the Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse. So it's a lighthouse cruise. So if you love the Woodwind, if you love sailing, if you love the lighthouse, this is a good opportunity. It's during the powerboat show. So if you want to pop out and get a little respite from the powerboat scene, join us aboard the Woodwind. Tickets for that one are available now. And then on November 1st, I'm going to be over in Chestertown. They have that down rigging event there.
Oh, okay.
Which is just of such a cool event. It's all the tall ships from around the bay gather there. Traditionally, the Pride of Baltimore has been there, the Sultana, the Calmer Nickel, the schooner Virginia, visiting schooners from out of town, all lined up there on the waterfront in Chestertown. And they have bluegrass music, they have barbecue, they have books. So I'm giving a talk there on November 1st about the Schooner Yacht America program as part of that downrigging festival. And I'll tell you, John, in 2019, I drove over there by myself just to, check it out. And I walked in, and the themes of this festival were tall ships, check, bluegrass music, barbecue, beer, and book talks. And I was like, if this is what heaven looks like, I'm pretty happy with it. It was a spectacular sunny day. So I just say to your listeners, if you haven't checked that out, that's November 1st. And I'll be speaking on the Schooner Yacht America book on that one.
And I'll tell you, Chestertown's a beautiful little town to get on the eastern shore. And Sultana, that's sort of their home port, right?
Correct. Yes, they're based out of there.
So you can see that there. It's funny, and I know you bill yourself as a river rat.
Yeah.
And I know that John
Stefanik,
he also bills himself as a river.
Yeah, different rivers. He was a Severn River guy. I actually grew up as a Magothy River guy.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was a thing. That meant something back in the day.
All right. So that's probably like with Ray Weaver, who's one of the song with her. Well, are you hireable? I've just got to think, just the depth of your knowledge, of your research, that a homeowners association, a senior complex type of a place would be just absolutely thrilled to hear.
Yeah. So typically, that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. So I give a lot of talks around the area on any of the 3 book subjects. I've got PowerPoint presentations on those. And then I did a War of 1812 talk at the Maritime Museum last year. I've got another World War II topic there coming this winter. I got myriad things. I have talks about the founding of Spin Sheet, which Mary and I do together. Typically I will do these things for book clubs. I have one coming up at Ginger Cove. I've done one at Baywoods. I am hireable. I do like the ability to sell books at the end of it.
Sure.
So get the Venmo out. I'll sign books. I'll sell
Every band
books.
that comes through Ram said they're there for the merch.
Yeah. The merch is an important part of it. I still have 3 kids in college. I'm still working a day job.
Sure.
So unfortunately, I can't retire and just do this full time. I'm out there in the community. I'm on the Woodwind. I'm at different museums. I was up at the Eastern Yacht Club in Larchmont 2 Fridays ago talking on the Schooner Yacht America. I'm going to be at the New York Yacht Club in a couple of months. I'm at the Mount Vernon Club in Baltimore. So I do a lot of these private talks with people interested in these subjects. Yeah.
Well, keep an eye out for it. And you want to check out davidgendellbooks.com, and it's Gendell. And that will give you an idea of everything that's there. What's in the future? Do you have another book in the works?
Yeah. Well, great question. Authors love that question traditionally. It just, what's next? Cause that's what gets our,
but you said that you started some of these books 20 years ago.
Yeah. So. And the way that I work is I have 3 or 4 things going simultaneously. And depending on which way the wind is blowing, I'll dive into one or another. So I always have ideas, and the publisher of the Schooner book and the Battles at Annapolis book was happy with the way the process went, was happy with the way sales have gone. And I'm lucky enough, they've asked me, to do more for them. And they've pitched me a couple of ideas. I've pitched them a couple of ideas. Everybody wants to do other things together. I did the Schooner book and the Annapolis book back to back, and they both came out 1 year apart, exactly 1 year apart, which is very fast for books. So I'm taking a little bit of a breather. I have a Annapolis focused War of 1812 story, which is much more exciting than it sounds when I bill it that way, which has me fascinated. A group of enslaved people escaped from Annapolis on a December evening to a British warship that was anchored off Tolly Point. And when I dig into that story, it is mind-blowing, some of the personalities involved and some of the details involved. And I've actually been able to speak with one of the descendants of an escaped slave who's alive and well in England. So that may be the story. The publisher loves the idea of Robert Goddard at North Severn during World War II. He was doing some secret work up there on behalf of the Navy, the Robert Goddard, and that theme of science helps win the war. That Oppenheimer type theme. The STEM team is back home creating cool stuff that's going to help win the war. The publisher likes that idea. So there's always a few things in the wind that we can chase down, and I'm not exactly sure what's next to answer your question.
Well, I'll tell you, when you hear Dave Gendell say, "It's got me fascinated," that's probably when you want to look out for, because it's going to be good when and if it does ever come out. But you definitely want to check out davidgendellbooks.com again, Facebook, Instagram as well. David Gendell, you can just search it on there.
Yeah. I actually post a fair amount about appearances and updates on that Instagram account, and it's a public account. It's at David Gendell. And, I'd love it if you drop the follow on there and get engaged.
Well, we will make sure that we have all the links in the show notes and everything else, but congratulations on the third book. I'm rooting for that fourth, fifth, and sixth one that's there. Rooting for those 3 kids to get out of college.
Yeah. Me too. No, and just thank you for the opportunity to jump on this podcast. I love what you do. I think it's incredibly valuable service that you provide to our community. I know you are passionate about Navy football and about our Eastport history as well. So it's really fun to have a conversation with you today and to connect with your audience.
Again, David, thank you so much. DavidGendellBooks.com. Go there and make sure you pick up a copy of each of these books.
Yeah, thank you very much.
This has been a bonus podcast from Eye on Annapolis. Please visit us at eyeonannapolis.net. Follow us on Facebook at All Annapolis and on Twitter at Eye on Annapolis. And if you haven't subscribed to the Daily News Brief podcast, go for it. And all of your local news will be delivered to your phone, tablet, or smart device by 6 a.m. every Monday through Friday.